Yo, what's going on, you guys? It's your boy 3 Stickity Stacks in this thing, baby, representing TKOG, and continuing on with episode 2 of season 1 of Revisiting Past Formats. Season 1 is going to cover all the popular decks from 2015 format. This era was so amazing to be a Yu-Gi-Oh! What a time to be alive, bruh. Like, what a time to be alive. This was such an amazing era of Yu-Gi-Oh! It is almost second to none. Like, this is nothing like what you guys are used to. If you like recently started playing the game in the past 2 or 3 years, you've had to deal with a lot of tomfoolery, probably, and arguably wanted to quit the game for a lot of good reasons. This was an amazing time to be playing the game. There were actually 8 decks, in my opinion, that were worthy in this format, and a lot of them, the least popular, honestly, and it hurts to say it, the least popular was Yang Zing, but you had Yang Zings, Satellar Knights, Cleaforts, Infernoids came out a little bit later, but they were around in that time, just mid to late 2015. You had Burning Abyss, you had Shaddolls, you had Necros, and you had Ritual Beasts. Ritual Beasts were just so unique. Like, there had never really been a deck like Ritual Beasts prior when they came out. It's just a different way to play. Like, you had so much unique strategies that were all thriving on their own. All of them were topping multiple events. And it was just so much, like, people knew what the most popular decks were, which were Burning Abyss, Shaddolls, and Necros, and arguably Cleaforts were up there. But Clees were sometimes a lot easier to solve, because a lot of their firepower honestly just came from their Floodgates. And if you had back row removal, the matchup wasn't too hard, because a lot of people were not playing towers, so it wasn't really that hard, you know. But Clee was a tough matchup, mostly because of the Floodgates. And then obviously their spot removal, like being able to bounce your cards, was pretty insane. Sacrifice was just such a good card, and then when they got their newer support, like Secrets of Eternity was freaking insane, bruh. Like, Stealth came out, and it was like, what the heck, I can't respond to this? You bouncing my Dante? Hold up, give me a second, let me respond. Like, it was just crazy, bruh. Like, it was, what a time to be alive. But my first episode I covered Satellar Knights. On the second episode, I'm gonna cover one of the most iconic decks to ever hit the scene, to ever be printed, Burning Abyss. To this day, you have diehard fans that will never ever give up on this deck because it's so good. It was a rank 3 toolbox at the time, and it did have its issues. You know, it did struggle with getting over monsters that were higher than 2,500. Until a little bit later, you know, you had some problem-solving cards. Like, Virgil was a heaven sent, especially for the mirror match. Shuffling was so much more beneficial than trying to, like, just out stuff with Zen mains, things of that nature. F-Zero was just heaven sent as well. There's just, like, so much that got added to the rank 3 toolbox to really help this deck. But Burning Abyss could make up, that's what I want to say. Burning Abyss could always make up for almost every weakness it had with another strength that was almost making you feel like you had to have that weakness, otherwise it would be too strong, if that makes sense. So BA just had so many good cards, and they had a toolbox that could only be rivaled by Shaddolls' utility. Shaddolls were like the only deck that had a higher utility and just had an upper echelon of their utility. This deck had every form of spot removal that was, like, not non-conventional but popular, like the targeting, and it had non-targeting when F-Zero came out, so it had, like, targeting and non-targeting. You had the ability to banish with Alic. You had, with Farfa, you had Alic spot negation. You had Calcap for back rows, Barbar for just that extra damage. Coming into turns, it was necessary. Libic, so that Mathman, you know, actually was really, really solid in this deck, mainly because of Libic a lot of the times. Just so much utility. You could summon from deck, you could summon from grave, you could summon from hand. Some people started opting to play Levy. That was a little bit later, but this deck just had almost every good effect you could think about, and that's what made this deck so good. Its toolbox was incredible, and you always got your cards back when you played Burning Abyss. You know, if you guys are not familiar with this deck right now, this is a time when this deck was so powerful, they actually hit Seer, and they hit Graf, and they hit Beatrice, because Burning Abyss was way too powerful. I think this deck was definitely ahead of its time, because it was just sometimes so free. You know, like, every board you made, you got those cards back, or you got better cards out of that board, if that makes sense. Every Dante you made could get you up to a +3, and it was just ridiculous that if you weren't like on Necros and you weren't like playing a deck or like Cleaforts that could get rid of the Dante without sending it to the graveyard, in the midst of trying to out the board, even if you dark hold it, Dante and his materials, all of his homies, would give you so much cards back that this deck was just an absolute nightmare to deal with. It was so annoying. I personally hated playing against this deck because it took so long to kill BA. Like, it was so hard to OTK this deck, and this deck grinded so well. The only deck that could grind as good as BA's, if you ask me, which you could take my opinion with a grain of salt. You don't have to take anything I say at face value. You could just say, Stacks, you don't know what you're talking about. But I personally think the only deck that could grind better than BA and was up there in its ability to just recur its resources was definitely Shadal's. But I will say, Shadal's could not recycle their extra deck as effectively as BA could, which, the Sir Dante loop just kind of put this deck over the top. It just was so obnoxious and so good. It had main deck outs to the Genlock. It was able to get, like, forcibly remove Windas, forcibly remove Construct, because Winda and Construct were crazy. Construct was crazy in that format because it was just so hard to deal with it. Like, especially when you, like, rock Construct back off Call the Haunted. It was like Necros they just had like no out. Like, you just sit with the Construct in defense and Necros just could not kill that card. Like, it was just so hard to kill a Construct. Like, so this deck having a card like Farfa, which, it was a little bit later. The first wave of BAs was good, but the second wave was just the nail in the coffin. Having Farfa in a format like this was just insane. This card was insane. I know it sounds like I'm getting besides myself or off topic. You guys might be like, just get to the deck profile, but what's the point of profiling a 2015 BA if you don't understand what was even going on in 2015? You don't even know why the cards are even there. You could just say, oh, I'm just going to net deck this. You really can't, because this list is not going to work modernly. Some of these cards just don't work the way they used to. So it's really important for you to get the background and for you to get the details on the format before we just jump into profile. Because the main purpose of this series that I started is not just to give off just a bunch of deck profiles. It's to explain to you what the format was in 2015 and show you really good lists and kind of just, it's a level of euphoria that is going to touch a lot of people who actually remember this format. So we know that Burning Abyss could have been just literally the best deck. It had everything that you could want out of a deck and more. Like, the lack of firepower was supplemented by this deck's ability to recur and consistently keep bodies on field until it could finally get that firepower. That's what I meant by every weakness BA had was almost like mitigated by the fact that its strengths were almost second to none. But let's go ahead and get into this list, you guys. So I played BLS. I know it hurts to sometimes have to banish a Dante when necessary, but I think this card was way too good, especially in the mirror match. The level of pressure that BLS applied to almost every matchup. This card outed cards like Unicorn. This card outed Construct. This card outed... We didn't really care too much for Winda, but Winda did hurt this deck a lot. It was okay depending on what BA you drew. Like, if you got access into Skarm or like Farfar, you were pretty much lit. And if you normal Mathman and he didn't get Veilered, you didn't mind. But the fact that this card outed so much, it made people scared to commit into boards, because even though this was at 1, people were really afraid of how powerful this card was, made people really afraid of this card. This card, when you dropped it, a lot of the times, there was just no coming back from that. You were gonna literally just banish a Dante or banish a Construct, smack another card. Like, this card was just way too powerful, and just he was ahead of his time. BLS should have been in every Burning Abyss list. That's how good he is. Then we have the one tour guide, and honestly, sometimes I want to play 3 Math, but Mathman was just a huge problem-solving card, a consistency card. He let you see your toolbox, and in addition to that, he let you force back rows, and he outed the Genlock as well, which sometimes was really, really important. A lot of the times, honestly. But when you drew the right combination of back row, you didn't mind just kind of like waiting a turn, because the Genlock made the Necros matchup very, like, there was just so much longevity in that matchup, because a lot of Necros players, when they had the Genlock, they were so fixated on protecting the Genlock that a lot of time there was a lack of damage output. So the games where you were playing against the Genlock lasted way longer than an average game would and an average game should. So even though Math Man out at the Genlock, you didn't always have to use him that way. When you already drew another card that could deal with the Genlock, you would use Math Man as a starter so that you know that when you out the Genlock, the follow-up is already going to be there for you. So you normally just dump your Skarm. But this card was just really, really good. He was crazy in Shaddolls, and he's crazy in BAs. And if you ever just still needed to make a Dante, like it was necessary, you could always just dump the Libic off of the, where's Libic at? You could always dump the Libic off the Math Man and get a BA out of your hand, and its effects were negated. So it didn't matter if Math Man was there. This card was just amazing. Utility. He's just so good. And then we had 3 Seer and 3 Skarm. We also had 3, I said 3 Skarm, 3 Graph and 3 Skarm. So these were the only VAs that were being played prior to Secrets. And these cards were like almost all the time all that you really needed, but the toolbox got a lot bigger and a lot better when we got Farfa and we got Alic and we got Calcab, and Barbar was so nuts. Yo, this card was fire, capital F. This card was so good. Oh my goodness, Barbar was insane. Then we had Libic. I personally loved Cogna because I thought Good and Evil was just way too good, way too disgusting of a card to just not play. So I loved Cogna. And also, just in case you just didn't have the resources for the follow-up, you could just immediately dump a Fire Lake and recur it off Dante. Because I ain't gonna lie, when we get to Fire Lake, this card right here, and then Rubik too. Arguably, you could have played more because hard drawing Rubik lets you play through back rows and play through disruptions a lot easier. And it was a lot easier to out certain cards, especially in the mirror match. Rubik was really important in the mirror because shuffling Dante was like, you just had to make Virgil in the mirror match. It was really hard. Like, you could F, you really could F and go for theirs. But to be honest, just getting rid of it, like taking him, removing him off the field, and that matter of removal made Rubik almost like you wanted to play 3. But you had all the utility. Like, this was your toolbox right here. So you had 3, 6, 9, 12. This is my list, by the way. Not every list looked like this. This is just my list. 12, 15, 18 BAs, right? So your toolbox was expansive and so diverse and well-rounded that there was almost no scenario that you couldn't play out of because of all the BA cards that you had and the utility that they gave you. So there were very few times when you would be looking at a board and you wouldn't be able to out that board. Especially with F-Zero, which came out a little bit later, it just made this deck over the top. Like, this could have... A lot of people would have argued that it could have went either way. It could have been Shaddolls or Necros and BA. But to be honest, it got to a point where BA and Necros kind of overshadowed Shaddolls just for a little bit. But this deck was definitely like one of the go-tos. And it was one of the decks to beat for a lot of people. And then I liked 3 Valor. So Valor was very, very powerful. There were a lot of conversions and tempo swings that Valor stopped. Valor stopped BLS. Valor never stopped Dante from milling for cost. Valor was kind of a dookie in the mirror match unless they were going for a bigger push. Like if they were going for like an F-Zero or if they're going for a Virgil. In those times, you would like, yeah, Valor was pretty nice. Valor was really good when they were trying to resolve Construct, just to kind of stop the amount of advantage they could accrue from that. Valor was not that great against certain hands for Ritual Beast. Some hands just kind of beat Valor, not gonna lie. And especially when they were still able to contact fuse, like their fusions just dodged Valor. So there were some matchups where it was unfavorable, but the matchups where you needed Valor, I think Valor was just super important. Some could have argued and said you should just play Maxi over Valor, but I liked Valor more because Maxi was supposed to stop plays from happening, but there were times when your opponent just would commit and kind of give you that 1 or 2, because they were only going to typically, especially Necros, you didn't really want to Maxi's Necros, right? I think Valor's was also a lot better against Necros, because you could Valor Lavalval Chain, you could Valor cards like Trishula, which was super duper important. In fact, Valor on Trishula was just so huge. Like when you couldn't, like sometimes you just couldn't empty your hand. That's why it was good to play traps that discarded. It was really, really good because sometimes you just use those to empty your hand. But when you couldn't play out of Trishula, Valor was also super impactful. So this card was just really good. Valor against the Teller Knights. It was just an amazing card. It had its ups and downs. But if I ever was to main deck a 3 of, it was always pretty much going to be Valor in a lot of instances, and you would just side Maxis because there were some decks that Maxi just wasn't that great against, to be honest. They're just really, but you still wanted to have Maxi. I just personally felt that playing these blowouts was better than having the 3 Maxi and the 3 Valor, because these were, Valor and Maxi were more proactive. They were meant to stop the board from happening, but these were there for when the board was there. So I didn't mind my opponent committing knowing that I had the out. So these were not only Genlock outs, but these were outs to boards with Construct and all that tomfoolery. Sometimes you couldn't make multiple Dantes, which every hand almost every time could, but you didn't always open gas like that. And there was a lot of problems when a monster had more than 2,500 attack that these really did solve. I know it sounds crazy, but there are some times where you could Dante just, you can't really make a rank, if you can only make one rank 3, you can't just make not Dante because you weren't going to get your cards back the way you wanted to. So a lot of the times when you're committing to a singular rank 3, it was almost certainly going to be Dante, because he was also going to put pressure on your opponent, and they had to approach getting rid of Dante in a systematic manner, if that made sense. So you really like these cards. You had enough Genlock outs, but just being able to out a lot more problematic boards, these cards were just way, way better sometimes for me personally than Maxi. But it's up to you, player preference. And then, to be honest, Foolish should have been up there with Tour Guide and Mathman, because this was like an honorary starter. It lets you see your entire deck. Foolish was just gas. Like, it was better than Mathman because you didn't have to commit to a normal summon, to be honest. And it played around Valor, which made it even better. And then Good and Evil. So some people did not play this card, but I liked it. I liked it a lot. I liked always having like multiple follow-ups. So this deck was really good with that, because Dante was everything for your deck. Dante was your firepower. Dante was your toolbox access. Dante was your recovery play, your follow-up. Dante also was your utility to let you just get access to all of your cards. So it was already good, but I liked being able to hard search my Fire Lake, or if I just didn't have the follow-up that I needed to, because sometimes Dante gets you the good card to discard for Good and Evil, making this card super busted, because you'd get multiple effects going off Good and Evil. This card was what's known as a conversion, or like a tempo swing. You would be far, far behind, like your board could have got outed by Brionic or anything like that. And Good and Evil being in your grave was like literally, you could go from nothing to more than just something. You could go from nothing to a total cascading, snowballing, a plethora of advantage. This card was insane. So to any of you who don't know what this did, it lets you search your whole deck. So excluding the ritual part, you would always pretty much have to have a BA. That's why sometimes I would just use Cogna to send Fire Lake so I can add it back off Dante. But when you have the luxury to do so, Good and Evil gave you all the options. Because the most important thing is it searches a Burning Abyss card. You have to pitch a BA. That's why I said sometimes I would just Cogna for Fire Lake. Because most of the time, you wanted a Fire Lake, but you wanted the benefit of being able to load your field. So that's why you like the Good and Evil into Fire Lake. Because sometimes your Dantes would get outed. Like I said, like there was like Brio and then there was a Cleafort matchup. You know, not everybody struggled with outing Dante without him touching the grave, but the simple fact that you could get Fire Lake access and have multiple bodies on the field in the process of getting to it was what made Good and Evil such an incredibly powerful card. This card is so good. So good. This card is insane. And this card right here is also insanity. Absolute insanity. It was crazy against everything. Everything. Like everything. Even in the mirror match, they would get their cards back. You could set them so far behind because you could sack a couple BAs that were summoned and not normal summoned, but summoned through their effect. So you knew your opponent lost so much value off of that Fire Lake. You could stop a potential Dante, and you also prevent those effects from occurring because you only pick one Burning Abyss effect, and that was it. It's just like Shadal's. You either get one or the other, but not both. This card was crazy against everything. Outing Floodgates in the clean matchup, hitting their Scales, hitting their Scout, hitting, like, against Necros. This card was just freaking insane. It was insane. And this card helped to play around Trish. This card is just insane. It was good against everything. There was no deck that you could not Fire Lake. And, excuse me. Fire Lake for 3 was just a nail in the coffin. And you would just recur this over and over. You just use it over and over and over. Fire Lake was just freaking insane. And it's not once per turn. The card was just so ahead of its time. This trap right here is the best trap in this deck. It's the best trap in this deck. There was nothing that could really compare to Fire Lake because the value that you got off sacking this card was just stupidity, bruh. It was just little tomfoolery. Like this card right here, it's way too good. I liked also Fiend Griefing. This was really good in your Necros matchup. It was just butt cheeks against Cleats, but it was really good in your Necros matchup, in your Infernoid, in your BA, and your Shadal matchup. It's pretty decent against everything, including Satellars, because they like activate call, you chain, shuffle the target. That would set Satellars back by turns. And on top of that, you get to start your engine, so it was a disruption, plus it accessed your toolbox. So it could be 2 disruptions in one. You could send a Farfa and just clear a card from the grave and clear a card from the field. It just set people so far behind. But you didn't want to play too many because, to be honest, it wasn't good against every matchup. And then Breakthrough Skill was insane. Effect Negation was just so good in this format. Like, Valor and Breakthrough might not be good in this format right now, like, including Imperm. But in the format I'm talking about, Effect Negation was so good. It was so good. And Breakthrough had amazing value in BAs because if you milled it off your Dante, it was free. And then we had Karma Cut. Karma Cut is super important. Karma Cut was for your mirror match, for your Shadal matchup, and also for Necros. It was okay against everything else, but those were the main 3 that Karma Cut was an absolute blowout. Because you could also hit the ones in Grave. So when you hit a Dante, you hit your opponent's second Dante off Karma Cut, they were only playing with 1 Dante. So this card in the mirror match was just tomfoolery. And then this card against Shadals, when they would make another fusion, you'd be able to clear that fusion and the one with the same name. So you'd hit multiple constructs, multiple windows. So if they were on window number 2, there were no more windows to go into because nobody was playing more than 2 windows at that time. And you would still pitch a BA. So this card was, all the traps that discard were utility cards in BA because every BA that you discard would normally get some form of interaction. If it didn't benefit you, it would hurt your opponent. So Karma Cut was always a 2-for-1. Fiend Griefing was a 2-for-1. This was like 2-for-5 to be honest, because the 2 BAs you sacked, not only were you popping 3 cards, but you would banish out Farfa and clear a back row off Calcap. Like in-phase Fire Lake was just retarded. And then you had Raigeki Break. This card is insane. To be honest, I still would probably want to play Raigeki Break in 2021. Because this card is so insane in BA. This card outs so much. It literally is just stupid. Raigeki Break was so good. To this day, I think this card is not power crept in BA specifically. It's just so good. Like, Raigeki Break is insane. Like, Karma Cut was so good for the decks you didn't want their cards to touch the grave, but Raigeki Break was good against everything. There was no deck that you could not Raigeki Break and it wouldn't be impactful, including the fact that you could in-phase Scarm and search for the card that you would add to your Raigeki Break interaction. This card outs the Jinlock. Karma Cut outs. I mean, yeah, they had Trish, but like, it was seldom that people were negating with Trish, but they did have the targeting negation off of Trish. But Raigeki Break was crazy. Nobody was really playing Gungnir. It was like few. Raigeki Break, Karma Cut were insane, and then Wind Blast was also stupid good. I personally felt like I liked Karma Cut better because a lot of times when I didn't want the card to touch the grave, I also didn't want them to get it back. So this card I felt like was more applicable and less situational than Karma Cut was, but I think Karma Cut had more impact on BA and Shadals and also Necros, but this card was also just stupid. There was actually like a turn skip because this was like the format was mid-paced, and the reason why the format was mid-paced because nobody was really like playing into Max T like that. Nobody was really committing so many resources into a turn 1 board. So a lot of turn 1 boards were just literally first turn setup and then get your follow-up and maintain your resources. Resource maintenance and the grind game was just pivotal in this format. So there's actually like a turn skip you could do with this because you could give your opponent their top deck and you'd give them a bad card. So this card was just insane. And then I still played Floodgates. These were like my 3 blowout traps. So Vanity, Skill Drain. Skill Drain is really good. Dante could still mill for cost. You can always pay costs under Skill Drain. And on top of that, like you could still do a lot under Skill Drain. And on top of that, this bad boy right here is just tomfoolery under Skill Drain. Tomfoolery. And then Crush card. This card was like a blowout. This card is so good against so many decks. This card is crazy. Most preferably, you wanted to crush card Necros. A lot of times, it was just so hard for them to come back from that. Oh my goodness, this card was just insanity. And you also, when you hit it, when they have a monster up, bruh, I'm telling you, they couldn't even go for some mirrors. Like, this card is insane. Because, like, they could still go for Cycle and then Sure It from Grave, but when you crush guard them, when they had monsters on field already, it's pretty insane because they couldn't even go for that play that I'm talking about. Which is just so good. Because, like, if they had access to Sure It, you know what I mean? Like, they could still just banish, get some mirrors, and kind of get that ritual back that you took from them from the grave. But it's just the timing of this card was the nail in the coffin. And for the extra, 3 Dante was a must. You never was playing any less than the 3. You only needed 1 Virgil because anytime necessary, it was recyclable in multiple instances. Downward Magician was insane in this deck. Downward Magician was freaking insane. This also helped you to get a bit more firepower with this card and its ability right here to detach. This was what made this card really, really good. If it attacked or was attacked, you could detach. That just gave you slow recursion advantage and also interruptions. This card was just crazy. Downward Magician was just like literal, bro. Like, it was just crazy. Oh my goodness. And then F-Zero. Oh my goodness, bro. So those of you who didn't understand how this card worked, it didn't take a card forever, but long story short, he couldn't be destroyed by battle card effects because you would just detach every time. So the gist of it was he really couldn't be destroyed. Couldn't be destroyed by battle. You don't take damage from this card. This was the best thing about this card in that time because this was pretty insane, right? Especially in mirror. So in this card, battle an opponent's monster, you could take control of that monster to the end of the battle phase. So what was important was this card helped you to deal with cards that were too big for BAs to get over, and you would use that card just to put more pressure on your opponent. I like playing multiple F-Zeros. Like, so this card also was like a wall. So to decks that couldn't out it, it would just sit there, and you really didn't want to battle it because his effect, right? So this card, I liked it at 2 because there's so many games that BA were not able to close those games out or win those games because they couldn't get over a certain cap of damage. There was certain attack power that they couldn't get over, but to just take that and just use it against your opponent made this card just so ahead of his time. And then I liked double Acid Golem, so this card's pretty insane. Like, this card was just literally the firepower that this deck needed. But with Skill Drain, oh, bruh, it was just so nice. This card was crazy, yo. Oh my goodness, this card was just so freaking crazy. Like, ugh, this card was insane. It's just 3,000. So some people might just be saying, like, Blue Eyes must have been broken. Dude, for BA to get that kind of firepower was insane. Because remember, this is rank 3 toolbox. There was not a lot of rank 3s that had firepower. Then we had Alucard. Alucard was just for back row. We had Nightmare Shark. Nightmare Shark was freaking insane. Nightmare and Barbar were just so good. Engineer, it's like more like when you just needed to stall. Sometimes you just needed your board to be impermeable. This card is pretty nice. He's not like a go-to, but it was just part of the toolbox that you didn't want to be caught without one of these. You also didn't want to be caught without a Zen Maze. Why isn't it showing Zen Maze? Zen Maze was also really, really good. Like, this card was pretty hard for certain decks to get over him, and he would still take cards from them in the process. So this card was pretty nice. And that is going to conclude my 2015 Burning Abyss deck. Hopefully you guys enjoyed this and learned about this format. This is going to sum up episode 2 of season 1 of revisiting past formats. And this is your boy 3 Stickity Stack signing out. Our Father which art in heaven, hallowed be thy name, Lord Jesus Christ. Thy kingdom come, and thy will be done on earth just as it is in heaven. Please give us this day our daily bread, Lord Jesus, and please forgive us of our debts as we forgive our debtors. And lead us not into temptation, Father, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, the glory, and the power forever. In the mighty name of Jesus, I pray. Thank you, Father. Amen. All right, y'all. Deuces.